Hi, Julie here. I'm most known for my cookies, but before I ever got into cookies, I actually worked for St. Louis at Home doing party design for the magazine. So a lot of my videos here on YouTube are actually not going to be cookie related, but are going to relate to party design. And in this particular video, I'm going to talk about a really simple place card idea that can be used to jazz up plates. I love it because it actually makes use of two things. The place card actually sits on the charger, so you don't have to make two things. Rather, the place card kind of does double duty. I also like it because it kind of picks up on that ever popular blackboard paint motif, except that this is like purely edible. So here's an example of a kind of a green chalkboard sort of effect. This is green frosting sheet and it's been stenciled with icing. So you could actually serve on it if you wanted to. You don't destroy a plate in the process because when you clean it up, you just simply put it under water, it dissolves and it goes away. It's also a great practicing technique. If you're going to be stenciling on cookies, it's easier to stencil flat on paper. So if you're a beginner stenciler on cookies and you want to learn how to do that, then maybe try this project because it'll help you along the way. Okay, so in all of these cases here, like for instance on this particular charger, I just cut a piece of frosting sheet, and I want to use frosting sheets here instead of wafer papers because they're less see-through, and if you've got a pattern underneath, it won't show through the paper. And I've just cut a simple circle and I've stenciled my name and I've done some simple dot work around it. I'm going to step that up a notch on this particular plate. This plate is the one I'm going to be working on by actually doing a dual mode stenciling approach, similar to what I talked about in my dual mode stenciling video about cookies. I'm just going to do it here on paper. So what I'd like to do is actually airbrush a faint pattern underneath and then stencil the darker name on top, just to give it a little more depth and interest. So here are some already airbrushed stencils. I use this particular flower stencil. I thought it might work nicely with this flower plate. And I've sprayed it with gold luster spray to create that effect. And I'm going to show you how I did that. I may actually end up using one of those because they look pretty great. Here I've got my frosting sheet, and I think at this point I can take it off its backing paper. Move my plate out of the way so I don't spray it. And I've got a backdrop set up too because the spray tends to get airborne. And you know, that's not something you necessarily want to clean off your cabinets and such. I'm working with a PME luster spray. You want to shake it up well to start. And you can get various shades of, I'm working with gold by the way too. You can get various shades depending on how close you apply it and how forcefully you apply it. So here I've got kind of a medium shade. Here it's the same color applied a little bit fainter. I don't know if you can see that. And here I'm going to do it a little bit darker and then choose which one I like best to do the final stenciling on. I like to make sure, again, the key thing is to make sure the stencil is flat and flush against the paper because the spray will get underneath, and you can use a trussing needle if you don't want to get your hands painted. But I'm just using my fingers. And oops, I moved it. I'm spraying a little closer than I sprayed either of the other two. Just to give you a sense of the color variation you can get. So that's pretty darn dark, as you can see, as compared to the ones I did further away and with less force last time. My fingers are gold. And I'm going to bring my plate back over and see which one I think will look best on the plate. I think that is a little too dark for what I'm going to do because I'm going to be stenciling on top with brown, and I don't want them to compete with each other. I just want this to be a slight texture underneath, and I think that's a little too faint. So I'm going to work with this particular one. And clean off my hands a bit. And now we're going to actually stencil. You could airbrush over with a darker color or spray over with a dark color, but I'm going to use royal icing just to give it a little bit more texture. But the first thing I want to do before I actually stencil on the piece of paper is just cut out the piece that I'm going to actually stencil over. And I'm going to put my stencil down underneath and kind of take a look at how the two might play together. So I think I'm going to crop off most of the big flower and just leave little flowers in there because they're going to interfere less. And so I'm going to select a piece right about here. And I'm using an edible food marker just to mark off the round shape so I can cut around it because I'm not too good at cutting rounds by hand. And I don't have a punch. I don't have a craft punch this big. This was the one I did earlier, so I have to again remove it from the backing paper. It's much easier to cut without that in the way. And then I'm just going to cut inside that yellow line so I don't see any of that in the final product. I'm cutting slowly because it's easier for me to get a round shape if I don't cut too fast and overcut. If I had a craft punch or was doing a really small stencil, the craft punches will punch a perfect circle, but they tend to be smaller in size. This is probably 3 inches across here. I trim a teeny bit more of that yellow off at the bottom. I'm going to be going around it with a little dotted border, so I will be able to conceal some of that, even if I can't cut it all off. And I'm taking care not to cut the part that was airbrushed. This was airbrushed a while ago, so it won't smudge, but if you just did it, it can potentially smudge. So we've just got a little bit of a floral background on that, and we're going to stencil over that. I am going to stencil on, let's see, will I stencil on this? Probably not, because there's some texture to that. So I'm going to just stencil on my flat surface, and I'm going to put my name on it. I have these particular stencils custom cut, but you could actually cut your own stencils. There are machines that allow you to do that. And to stencil, I'm working with, let's just check the fit on this fit here too. It's going to be anchored right about there, ultimately. And I think I'll put my name something like that. So it's a little bit on the diagonal. Okay. Back over here. Again, you want your stencil lying flat. There are machines that you can buy. They only cost $100 to $200 to cut your own stencils, and I've done that too. Okay, so I want this very flat again, and with this I'm using icing of stenciling consistency, which is relatively thick royal icing, and I'm going to start just by anchoring. I have a whole video on stenciling, so you can refer to that for all the details. I'm just going to start by getting all the icing down, and this is kind of a dark brown because I want it to show brownish gold. I want it to show up over the background texture that I just airbrushed. And then I want to go over it in one final swoop just to take the icing down to the level of the stencil, because if it's too thick, when you pick up the stencil, it'll leave peaks, and I want it to be nice and flat. And then there you have it. So it's stenciled. And the next and last, well, second to last step is actually getting this on the plate. So let me bring the plate over. I'm going to anchor it about there, and then I'm going to do a little bit of brown dot work around it. Now, again, as with cookies and anchoring frosting sheets onto cookies, I stick them down with a little bit of corn syrup. But rather than putting it on the back of the paper as I might ordinarily do, because that icing is still wet on top, I don't want to turn that over. So I'm going to actually apply it directly to the plate. But to make sure that I don't overflow into areas I don't want, I'm putting down my template that I used to cut the round, and I'm just going to sponge the corn syrup within that. That's a good way to make sure you don't overshoot that circle. And I don't want it too thick again, because it can show through even that frosting sheet. That might be a little bit thick in one area, so I'm going to come back in with some paper towel and just blot out a little bit of extra, because I don't want it to kind of bleed through the frosting sheet. Okay, and then simply stick it down, kind of like it about there. And press it down, and then to finish it off, because I don't want to see that yellow and I want to conceal that cut edge, I'm going to use a little icing of beadwork consistency, looser icing, and just put some dots around it as I did on some of the other plates. Just put my glasses on for that. And then you've got a finished place card plate. Checking my icing flow on the counter. It's pretty good. We're just going to go all the way around. You could do another pattern on the edge too. You could do some kind of frilly line work, zigzag work, but I think this kind of keeps it nice and simple. Okay, I'm almost all the way around, and I want to take extra care as I come around this curve to cover that yellow line that I didn't quite trim off, and I'm going to be able to do that, I think, with no problem. Ta-da! finished place card place setting. I'd simply let that dry and then set it on as a decorative element on top of a charger to make a beautiful and elegant place setting. Till next video, live sweetly.